Thank you so much for being on the programme this morning. If I may, I just want to start away from politics, because 6 children under the age of 10 have died after developing the infection Strep A. And I know this is something that so many families are going to be really concerned about. How worried should we be about it?
Yes, and I think it's important to highlight that the UK Health Security Agency have said that in most cases it will be mild cases of Strep A, but it is highly infectious, which is why I think the important message to get across this morning is parents should look out for the symptoms. So fever, headache, skin rash, that sort of feeling of the skin being slightly rough. Really important to be vigilant because in the very rare circumstance that it becomes serious, then you need urgent treatment, obviously.
Yes, certainly. Thank you for giving the symptoms. I know it's something that definitely lots of parents in particular will be keen to get the full information on. Now, you're announcing today what you describe as sensible contingency measures in the event of public sector strikes. So what's the plan?
Yes, absolutely. Well, the first plan is to get these strikes called off. I think the important thing to remember is Putin is using energy as a weapon because he's failing so badly in this illegal war in Ukraine. That energy use by Putin means we've had very high inflation rates and we've got to try and bring down inflation. If you chase inflation or above inflation, in some cases, pay, then you will embed inflation for longer and hurt the most vulnerable, in fact, which is our message to the unions, is to say, this is not a time to strike, this is a time to try and negotiate. But in the absence of that, it's important for the government, it's the right and responsible thing to do, to have contingency plans in place. And we have a very strong team at Cobra, and when I was in the seat of the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, we were doing a lot of the work in looking at what we need to do to minimise the disruption to people's lives. Whether it's unfair if you're travelling at Christmas for the border force or any other workforce to really disrupt people's lives or livelihoods.
Let's look at the specifics. Are you talking about the military being involved? Soldiers could be driving ambulances.
So we're looking at the military, we're looking at a specialist response force, which we've actually set up a number of years ago, a surge capacity to be able to deal with, in the unfortunate circumstance, if you do have, say, a strike at border force, you've got to be able to make sure that there is minimum disruption. The most important thing is to secure...
Could be coming in, filling some of these roles. Of
correct. So that because we have to make sure our borders are always secure, and that is something that we guarantee.
And is it the same in the NHS?
And again, of course, in things like driving ambulances, other parts of the public sector, we've got to try and minimise disruption. But the way you try and deal with this is if the unions can see that you're chasing inflation or above inflation pay deals is not the thing to do right now. This is a time to come together and to send a very clear message to Mr. Putin that we're not going to be divided in this way.
Just to look at the specifics as well. Are you also looking at using pharmacists to ease pressure on the NHS, as the Sunday Telegraph is reporting? So perhaps pharmacists being able to diagnose minor conditions and even prescribe antibiotics?
So the hope is obviously that the NHS, and if there is a strike, and again, I hope there isn't a strike, say, for example, with the nurses, is that there is a minimum safety level of delivery in place already. But the NHS will look at all contingency planning to make sure that patients are able to get the urgent treatment that they need.
So you could be looking at pharmacists playing a bigger role there.
Well, the NHS will make sure that we have to be able to deliver a safe level of treatment and support to patients at all times. And I hope, again, I would put it back to the unions themselves to say, one, we shouldn't be striking. If you look at what the pay review bodies for the NHS recommended, we've accepted that recommendation. In fact, last year, when pay was frozen, nurses got a 3% pay rise. They do an incredible job. Of course, I understand that. But to ask for 19% pay rise, which cost the NHS £10 billion, I think it's the wrong thing to do right now.
I do want to come back on this as well, because, you're talking about not chasing inflation. For lots of people who are on low-paid jobs, they're not chasing inflation. They're trying to get a pay that is matching the cost of living, because they're looking at their shopping bills going up, they're looking at their energy bills going up. They want a pay to be reflecting how much more they're having to spend on things. It's not about embedding inflation for them, it's about surviving.
Of course, and absolutely, which is why the Chancellor came to the dispatch box and delivered a £150 billion energy package. By the way, if you take that into equivalence, that's the equivalent of the whole of the NHS to support people's households, otherwise their energy bills would have spiked, to support businesses as well. The money we're putting into helping those most vulnerable, the 8 million most vulnerable households, is significant. We have to come together. This is not a time to be divided, to, I hope, send a very clear message to Mr. Putin that he can't use energy as a weapon in this way, and we will remain united, which is why we've accepted the pay review bodies on the NHS and on schools.
A nurse on 20 grand a year, you would think that maybe there were other ways of sending Putin a clear message on Ukraine, rather than the fact that you're going to have to have a real-term pay cut.
No, but we've accepted the pay review body on nurses, and as I said to you, last year they got 3%. This year's recommendation is £1,400, so the starting salary of a nurse would be £31,000. It is difficult. I'm absolutely conscious of the fact of how hard things are at the moment, but this is not a time to go for 19% pay rise that will cost £10 billion, because if you accept all the inflation level pay rises, that's about £28 billion. It costs every household just short of £1,000. That is unsustainable when we're trying to be fiscally disciplined and bring inflation under control. Because if inflation is embedded, it'll hurt those families, those nurses, even more in the long term.
Now, I want to talk about immigration, because we've seen record levels of immigration, record numbers of small boats crossing the Channel as well. Many people voted for Brexit to be able to control Britain's borders. Are we in control of them?
So on illegal migration, small boats and these gangs that are preying on the vulnerabilities, putting lives at risk, we have a plan. The Prime Minister, within weeks...
Are we in control of our borders?
Well, of course we are in control of our borders, but there is an issue around these small boats and these gangs and illegal migration, and the Prime Minister, within weeks of taking power, signed an agreement with France to increase the number of patrols by, I think, about 40%, which will help on this. They've already turned back about 30,000 people who would have come across. The numbers are still far too high. I recognise that. And again, I spent some time in the Cabinet Office looking at this. We are determined to deal with it. This Prime Minister is determined to deal with it. There are no easy solutions, but there are a number of things that we can do, including operationalising Rwanda to actually send a very clear message to these gangs that this will not work. And I think the moment that happens, you'll see the numbers begin to drop rapidly. As we saw when if you remember, under Theresa May, we dealt with the issue of people coming across, being smuggled in trucks. And reduced that and took it to near zero. So it's important to focus on it. And then on legal migration, we need to make sure that we focus on if there is any abuse of the legal migration system. If there are people, for example, our universities do a brilliant job, and it's a great export for the UK. People are coming here, doing their PhDs and their masters, and creating new innovative things for the British economy. But if there's an abuse of the system, then we should stamp that out as well.
So you are looking then at reducing the number of foreign students coming to university?
No, I didn't say that.
Okay.
What I said to you is foreign students coming to our universities are a great export. These are really, really important to us and, of course, our economy,
okay.
To our really high-quality universities. But if there is abuse, and there was in the past, I remember some time back, bogus universities setting up kebab shops.
On illegal migration, because there is another question I was keen to squeeze in on this. There's a report by Nick Timothy, who, of course, was the Chief of Staff to Theresa May, who recommends banning people who enter the UK through illegal routes from ever settling in the United Kingdom.
There should not be a need for people to come through on an illegal route, because if you have a legitimate right to settlement, to refuge, then you should be able to settle here. And it's right that we should address the issue of illegal migration.
So you are potentially considering banning people who enter the UK illegally from ever settling.
Well, look, that's an issue. That's the question for the Home Secretary.
Okay.
What I'm saying to you is we've got to deal with the gangs that are exploiting people, putting their lives at risk on these small boats. And I am absolutely certain that the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary are focused on this. No easy answers, but we will absolutely deliver against this in the weeks and months to come.
Now, I want to talk to you with your party chair hat on, if I may. You know, you're responsible for campaigning, you've got a big role in election planning as well. So I just want to look at the state of the Conservative Party right now. You know, this is the current tracker poll from YouGov. You can see there has been, you know, a slight narrowing, I guess, of the polls, but it's been nothing like, you know, a big bounce for Rishi Sunak. Labour still well ahead. And of course, if these polls were replicated in an election, it would be Keir Starmer in Downing Street. How concerned are you?
So when you ask people, and I know a little bit about polling, because I founded YouGov.
Well, here you go. Is it a bit awkward looking at YouGov, your company, having the
Not at all. There's
Conservative
lots of quality pollsters, including YouGov. But if you actually look beneath the headline, a couple of things I would pull out from that. One, when you ask people the question, if there is an election tomorrow, how would you vote? Well, people know there's no election tomorrow. So that response, what you're seeing there, is currently how they feel about the government's track record on delivery. Now, we know we've had a difficult time. You know we've had a difficult time. I've been on this show and other shows having to explain why we're going through this sort of difficult period in the parliamentary party and in our leadership. We're in rebuilding mode now to make sure that we be ready and fit for purpose for the local elections next year and then for a general election in 2024. Now, if you dig beneath the data, I'd be worried if I was Keir Starmer because actually...
You'd be worried if you were Keir Starmer?
I would.
Look at that red line all the way, look at that space between the two lines.
I'm going to tell you for why, if you'll allow me, right? If you look at his numbers, it's very soft. There's not a great passion for what Keir Starmer is saying. Certainly there's no passion for him when he went before the Trade Union Congress saying he'll repeal all of the trade union legislation that the Conservatives have brought in. He's made that promise. And if you ask that same people, is that a good thing or a bad thing? I think most of them will say it's a bad thing. But we are in a rebuilding exercise. We've got to rebuild that trust with the public. So that began with the Chancellor of the Exchequer and the Autumn Statement to deal with inflation. When we bring inflation back under control, the Bank of England, that's independent, will do that. They have all the tools available to them. But we have a responsibility to help them because we have fiscal responsibility to do that. When we've done that, when we've delivered on innovation, that 20 billion investment, when we've delivered on skills, when we've delivered on the infrastructure that people want to see in their constituencies and small boats, it's a real problem for us, right? Then you'll see those numbers move in the right direction. I'm confident of that.
And if you can't deliver on things like small boats?
We will. That's my point.
Now, you talk about rebuilding. Is it true that CCHQ is now ranking Conservative MPs on how many leaflets they deliver and how many doors they knock on? According to The Times, they use Theresa May as an example, pointing out that she's out twice a week. Is that right?
I like all candidates, all MPs, as they do themselves, by the way, to be out on the doorstep, knocking on doors.
So it sounds like you are ranking them.
Engaging with their constituents. It's the right thing to do.
Who's the best performer?
Well, there are lots of great performers, and you will see, by the way, the phones are ringing at CCHQ, people have come back, people are supporting us. The atmosphere in the building, I think, is incredibly positive. And as I said to you, we will continue to build. We've got local elections, great councillors, great candidates for local elections next May, and then, of course, for the election, whenever the Prime Minister calls it.
It's interesting, because you're talking there about the positive atmosphere in CCHQ, and I have to say, if you take a step back and look at the country right now, the Conservatives, of course, have been in power for 12 years. We've got record A&E waiting times. We're spending more on debt interest payments than education. Whether it's the time you're waiting to book a driving test or the backlogs in the court, it feels like this is a country that is breaking at the seams. Why would anyone vote for the Conservatives who've been in power presiding over this?
Well, because I was close to this. We delivered the most successful vaccination programme in this country's history, probably in the world, where we've protected the nation. And you see what's happening in countries today. Look at what's happening in China vis-a-vis dealing with the pandemic today. We've dealt with that pandemic. During that period, Rishi Sunak, as Chancellor of the Exchequer, had to put over £400 billion to work to protect people's livelihoods and, of course, jobs. We've done it again just now because Putin's using energy as a weapon. £150 billion energy package 3 million businesses protected would have gone to the wall. Perfectly viable businesses.
But we know as well that the
households
the
that
problem,
would have struggled. £150 billion of additional help for people. If you take all of that, that has to be paid for, right? Then, of course, we have the recovery. The NHS has to recover from the pandemic. That is happening now. We've dealt with a 2-year waiting list. By next April, we'll deal with the 18-month waiting list. And, of course, we've got a package for Christmas at the moment to make sure the NHS gets through Christmas, a 500 million package to get people into social care, a big investment in social care. All these things are happening. But the onus is on us to demonstrate to the public, to show by doing.
Particularly
and that is what we're doing.
Particularly because we just had a Conservative Prime Minister who crashed the economy, became the shortest-serving PM ever and had to U-turn on her entire budget.
Well, I'm going to repeat what Jeremy Hunt said, the Chancellor. He said, that mini budget was reversed within 3 weeks. Even the OBR would say to you that that's not the impact on the economy. The OBR, in fact, said, the Office for Budget Responsibility, the impact on the economy is because of Putin's use of energy.
They have also said, they have also talked about the impact of the mini-budget as well. It's not purely international factors.
They said you're quite right, but they said the predominant bulk of the impact was because of Putin using energy as a weapon. We mustn't forget that. Peace has a price. And we have to continue to support Ukraine and Vladimir Zelensky because this illegal war has to end with Russia leaving Ukraine.
There are reports that some Conservative MPs believe that Boris Johnson may still be the answer to your election issues, shall we say. Here's Stephen Swinford in The Times. Boris Johnson's supporters are convinced that Sunak will fall and that Johnson will replace him, with the May local elections seen as a focal point. You obviously backed Boris Johnson to be leader. Do you still speak to him?
I speak to Boris Johnson. In fact, I spoke for him in his constituency. He did a conversation with the chairman of the party. Let me tell you what Boris Johnson thinks, as he did when he reflected and stepped aside and supported Rishi Sunak. He said, I will not be selfish. I will put country and party ahead. And Rishi has the overwhelming support of the parliamentary party, which is why he supported him. That was the right thing to do. We have to remain united. We've got local elections coming up next year, and we've got a whole delivery programme on health, of course, on education, and, of course, safer streets and small boats that we've got to deliver against. That is what Boris Johnson's focused on at the moment. OK. No chance, then, he'll come back as leader? No, because having another leadership election will be a surefire way of us losing in elections. OK. One question that I just want to ask before we finish, which is about the allegations around a Conservative MP. The victims, we understand, or alleged victims, haven't made formal complaints, but a number of Conservative MPs have made complaints or reports about this person's alleged behaviour. Should they be suspended from the Conservative Party? Well, this is a very important safeguarding question, and the moment I walked into the building at Conservative headquarters, I asked for independent legal advice on this issue, as well as our own in-house legal advice on the case. We also spoke to the House authorities. We spoke to the Party Ethics team on this. And it is up to the police, because these allegations are third-party allegations that have been handed to the police. I've spoken to the police as well, of course. And if the police decide to take action, then, of course, we will take action as well. OK. Just finally, England playing later today. Indeed. Are you going to be watching? Of course. Is it coming home? It will. I'm not going to sing that song or go anywhere near it, because every time I've done that, it has broken my heart. OK, thank you very much indeed for being on the programme.